All right, we are very, very honored to be joined today by Professor Brian Keating from the University of California, San Diego, and he is a distinguished scholar, a Brown University graduate, and a world-famous astrophysicist. He'll be sharing with us a bit of his thoughts of how the post-coronavirus world is going to look. Professor, thank you so much for joining.
No, it's a pleasure to be on, Rabbi. Thank you so much for connecting.
It's a pleasure. So first of all, just let's hear a bit about who you are, what your background is, and just about how it is that you're looking, from what lens you're looking at this changing world.
So I am an astrophysicist. My specialty is cosmology, and I joke that I study the heat from Bereshit, the leftover radiation from the formation of the first material objects in the universe, which were, of course, protons, neutrons, some croutons. No, there were no croutons in the early universe, but we did have copious amounts of light in the form of, eventually in the form of heat, left over from the fusion of individual protons to make hydrogen, helium, and their isotopes. So that heat persists in what's known as the cosmic microwave background radiation, which is a persistent relic suffusing all of space and time, first discovered in all places in New Jersey in the 1960s. Wow. So one of the best things to come out of New Jersey. I joke a lot because I'm a New Yorker, so you'll have to forgive me at heart, Rabbi. But the way that we go about our work is we build telescopes that can see heat, not light, and we look for these particular patterns that would be indicative of the creation event and how that unfolded and what impacts it's made on the matter, energy, and other forms of particles within nature that physicists are interested in studying. So we do that from exotic locations. We can't do that from San Diego, unfortunately, as convenient as that would be. So it's actually been impacted pretty radically by COVID, because one of the places we go is Chile. So we go to the high Andes Mountains in northern Chile, called the Atacama Desert. And now Chile, and as we're recording this in April, has been locked down and all foreigners sort of expelled. And the other place we do it is perhaps the only place on Earth that doesn't have a single case of COVID, which is Antarctica. The other project, which is located above my shoulder, a picture of it from the cover of my book, Losing the Nobel Prize. I'll see if I can tilt that over. There we go.
Yeah, no, I see it very clearly.
Yeah. So those are images from the South Pole, Antarctica, and there's 0 cases there because people that had to get there arrived at the South Pole site in early January of 2020. So they actually missed out on getting exposed, and now they're under lockdown because you can't come in or out of the South Pole even when there's no COVID. So in one sense, it's the best of times, to be at the South Pole. In the other sense, it's a challenging time for science and scientists.
So you see directly how COVID is affecting the lives of scientists and scientific study and development.
Yeah, it's actually impacting me, very particularly, both as a professional professor. So I'm an educator, teacher, and I'm also a parent of young children, and they are out of school. So I'm teaching them, part of the time at home. And then the other part of the time, I'm teaching my graduate students and my undergraduates remotely using the same Zoom technology that we're speaking on, which has really been, heaven sent in some ways. Yeah. But the challenges are really, replete with potential fraught with peril. I'm always worried I'm going to accidentally teach, quantum mechanics to my 2-year-olds, or, perhaps toilet train a graduate student. That's very, it's very challenging.
And so how do you see, through all these changes, how do you see the role of scientists? Do you see it as something that's changing, remaining the same, and how so?
I think there's a lot of different ways. And, people ask me about, what are my feelings about COVID? And, the truth is we tend to have this sort of halo association, halo effect, where someone will be an expert in something and they'll assume that person's an expert in everything. Classic example is Albert Einstein, who, he'd be asked about, should there be nations on Earth? And he said no. Or, should a given country go to war? No. And so he was brilliant, perhaps the most brilliant physicist, cosmologist, whatever you want to describe him as, that ever lived. And yet, a lot of his knowledge doesn't translate directly into what I would call wisdom. He was reputed not to be the best father who ever lived, and had trouble with fidelity and other things. So, it's always a perilous thing what people say about me. I always say, usually I'm asked before COVID, the most common thing I'd be asked is about global warming. And my standard answer is, when people ask me about global warming, I hope that, they don't ask an epidemiologist about cosmology or an atmospheric scientist about astrophysics, because you stick to your domain of expertise. And that's really all I have expertise in. Of course, I can think mathematically, I can think logically, I can think in terms of data and facts and how they're presented. But, a lot of it, it's been ups and downs. There's been really mass miscommunication of scientific results that led to excess panic, about using the oceans here in San Diego, et cetera. It was needless in my opinion, but, the way that I really see it most clearly that I have expertise in is the potential impact of COVID on education. I see that being being a watershed moment for education. And I'm worried for my universities, the ones that I work and teach at, as well as, the schools that we send our children to. What will be the impact when parents see that they're spending, $80,000 to send their child to Stanford, and then, they're getting 3 hours a day of education on Zoom, or UCSD. I'm not saying we're any better, but that we prepare, we had zero time to prepare before it was locked down. And I think that's going to make a lot of people question the value of a college degree, especially in this era where, you can talk to me, you can talk to 30 other colleagues around the world, and they are doing similar types of research. So I think it's going to impact college in ways that we can't even imagine at this point.
Right. So first of all, I really can't thank you enough for pointing that out, recognizing the boundaries of expertise. And if you're a astrophysicist, it's not, doesn't mean you're a medical expert. And I feel like that has been a major issue for me as a rabbi, because I feel like often you see rabbis overstepping their boundaries in terms of giving medical advice, giving scientific advice when it's not their place. And then vice versa, when I hear someone who's an actor, a scientist, whatever it is, saying, this is how religious people should do things, when that's out of their realm of expertise. I feel like that if everyone just stuck to their field and did what they are supposed to be doing, we would spare a lot of trouble. And sadly, we see as you have today on television, you have one day they bring Dr. Fauci on, and it's Dr. Fauci versus Dr. Phil. There's this confusion of people's field. Dr. Phil is a PhD in psychology. Dr. Fauci's expert in infectious disease. So that's such an important thing, especially in these times. And I also share your concern as an educator. I share your concern for the future of education. That's definitely something that needs to be looked at. In terms of thinking of education, do you see a generation that's looking now at what's happening, saying, okay, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a scientist? Do you see kids as wanting to go into these fields more now?
I think it's interesting. It depends on the age of the kid, obviously, and what they see. So I'll take you back, 75 years. In the 1940s, there was really a revolution that took place thanks to, unfortunate events that proceeded in the 1940s, namely World War II, and of course, all the awful impact on the world. One of the impacts of that war was really the promotion of physicists, such as myself, especially in the realm of subatomic particles, nuclei, et cetera, and even in the form of radio, development of radio and what's called radar eventually. Those two projects, there was the Manhattan Project, which is much more famous, that led to the atom bombs. But then there was also an equally, and perhaps more relevant on a daily basis, because, I don't know what apps you use on your phone to tell the weather, look at what radar, but you don't see like nuclear, any relevance to nuclear bombs or anything today. So, of course, that's really important. But the physicists were really promoted to this level of almost like superstars, where it became really important for every university to have a very thriving physics department teaching nuclear physics, radio physics, et cetera. And for the average, man mostly that was graduating at that time, unfortunately,
Mm-hmm.
for women in the world, but that was, for them all to have a basic rudimentary education in physics. And this is
Mm-hmm.
pointed out to me by my friend David Kaiser, a professor of science and technology and physics at MIT.
Mm-hmm.
And so much were valued physicists, so much was ascribed to them that they were actually escorted by police to their conferences, to
Wow.
their laboratories. There are 30 laboratories working on the atom
Mm-hmm.
bomb project all over the country, and then there were equal number of projects going on, and that left an impact that led to later the development of the cyclotron, the atom smashers,
Mm-hmm.
the high-powered lasers, and all these different
Wow.
aspects of technology, space exploration,
Mm-hmm.
all came, unfortunately, as a result of this terrible, terrible, tragic events of World War II, and the
Mm-hmm.
necessity to have this technology influx in education.
Mm-hmm.
I am sort of speculating that one of the green shoots that may come out of this COVID crisis
Mm-hmm.
is a similar kind of, as World War II was the physicist war. The COVID war is, thank God, not against nations and wanting to obliterate each other, but against this invisible enemy that we all want to destroy. Maybe this century, the 21st century, will be the biologist's century. If last century was this physicist century, and imagine all the technology that could come from that. And I think there
Mm-hmm.
are a lot of people that are very interested in that. Some for different reasons. Some want to make profits. Some want to, attain fame, win Nobel prizes, and other things. But there's an awful lot of young people that are terribly, terribly interested in solving this crisis for the pure beneficence to confer on mankind.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So you do see more people, kids looking at things now saying, I want to become a biologist, I want to become a doctor, I want to become a nurse. They're seeing these as the heroes of the century.
Yeah, I see that as a possible positive outcome, that the recognition of the challenge and the interest and the curiosity that instead of going on Wall Street, nothing wrong with that necessarily, but
Mm-hmm.
using mathematical STEM skills to do something
Mm-hmm.
in the financial industry might not have the prestige and the cachet that
Mm-hmm.
working to cure a disease. And in even things like, what if an outcome of this is we cure the common cold, or we treat it, or we reduce the ordinary influenza deaths, which are awful. Tens of
Right.
thousands of people die from this.
Mm-hmm.
What about that? So yeah, I see there are some aspects of hope that could come out of it. I hope it won't be, forgotten very quickly. I hope it'll be
Mm-hmm.
over quickly, but I hope it won't be forgotten. And how much we need to cooperate amongst scientists around the world, but again, being cognizant of our, what does the Talmud say, that the best doctors go to hell? In other words, you
Mm-hmm.
kind of expect this notion that you can almost be like God because you can make these innovations. And I think that's the
Mm-hmm.
hallmark, the most important aspect that's novel about human beings. But we should do so with humility, of course.
Mm-hmm. In what way do you think, not to point any fingers, but in what way do you think the way society has perceived science until now may have affected the way this outbreak played out? Could we have done better? Could we have done worse? Uh, has there been one kind of attitude towards science that needs to be changed? How do you see things?
Well, I've seen things that we could have been avoided. It couldn't really have been avoided without really massive control over all of society. And don't forget,
Mm-hmm.
coming as it did out of China, it's not blaming Chinese people at all. I mean, a lot of my students throughout history and some of my best friends and colleagues are Chinese. In fact, I was invited to attend a conference this month in China,
Mm-hmm.
and I was very much looking forward to being a
Mm-hmm.
scholar visiting there, and through courtesy of several of my friends working on similar projects in Tibet. And I had to obviously cancel that, and I was very disappointed, because I love these people, I love working with them. But the fact is, we do have a rudimentary understanding of how this could have originated, and but the question as to could it have been prevented? No, I think it could have been. The impact could have been lessened if we had implemented very low tech things. I mean, you remember there was this worry that hospitals run out of ventilators and protective
Right.
equipment, and we kind of mobilized a little bit to get those produced. But I pointed out, it's not like building a synchrotron, a particle accelerator, to build a ventilator. I mean, there's thousands of pieces of these technologies. It's just we didn't do it. We relied so much on foreign, technology And I do feel like we can use it to our advantage. Perhaps we can onshore, if not into the U.S., perhaps we could bring some to my neighbors here in Mexico, bring back production to North America. I mean, they're just as smart and creative, and have a wonderful partnership. That might be a green shoot that comes out of it as well. A lesser reliance on this global just-in-time infrastructure, especially in the era when things can spread so quickly, and especially fear and hysteria. So I worry about that almost more than anything in terms of after it's cured, what will be the long term? Will it be a doubt of scientists because so many predictions are necessarily uncertain? Let me give you an example. If you take my physics, 101 class, and you turn in the answer and you say, what's the acceleration of a falling object due to gravity? And you tell me you measured it and it's 9.8 meters per second squared. I'll say, good job, Rabbi, but you fail, because you always have to associate with every given measurement your uncertainty in that number. And I think what scientists did is they made predictions, and they didn't really communicate just how important the uncertainty, the confidence bounds that a scientist have are equal to importance to his or her valued measured. So I think that's something that needs to be appreciated a little bit more, and that we need to be a little bit more precise when we speak about how much we don't know.
Thank you. There's a great deal that has been said about the relationship between science and religion. There have been times that there was outright hostility between the two groups. Then there's what I feel is most common now. It's the sort of passive aggressive, I'll ignore you, you ignore me. And then there's an approach Lord Sachs articulated in his recent book, The Great Partnership. How do you see the relationship between science and religion evolving in the future? Do you see religion recognizing how personal and immediate the impact of science is on them and working more closely with scientific communities? Do you see scientists seeing the efforts of religious communities to help alleviate this crisis, bringing them closer, or will indeed the relationship remain the same or worse?
I think it's likely to remain the same, perhaps worse, simply because I think you have this effect of domain level expertise where, I know everything about science, and the Torah, religion, Judeo-Christian values, whatever, they do not necessarily have anything to say about science, so therefore they're irrelevant to me. And I'll just say two things. One, the word science in Latin means knowledge. It doesn't mean wisdom. Torah has elements of wisdom in its connotation. So to say that that science and Torah are distinct things, of course they are. The problem is I don't know a single person who's religious who says that they have no need or have an open hostility. Like I see no ascientific religious practitioners. I see a lot of atheistic, monotheistic, if not pantheistic. We can get into that some other time. But scientists that believe anti-religion, that there is definitely no God, and I think that hostility it's very difficult to have a comity, kind of consilience between the two, because I think one side fails to see the relevance of the other, and therefore will just kind of straw man cherry pick things that they don't that they can just dismiss with a quip and a one-liner. On the other hand, religious people, I think, have an obligation too. And that's, if you want to know God, as the Talmud says, his handiworks are written on the sky, and to know his by what his deeds are. I think those are, the actions that God is the originator of everything. Then you should be the people that are most interested in it, right? Because there's not going to be
absolutely
the likelihood of you getting direct prophetic revelation is pretty low.
Pretty low, yeah.
The likelihood of you seeing the glory and grandeur and the way the universe is, I think that's quite easy and accessible. And thanks to many people that I work with, they write books that are accessible to people. Now, they may be atheists, they may be devout atheists, as I say, but I think that they also miss the point. The scientists who read and write these books, in the sense that it's unfortunate to, as I mentioned once, I was on Ben Shapiro's show, and I said to Ben, how many lines in the Torah, Bereshit, the beginning of the book of Genesis, are about science? And I said the actual number is about 35 verses out of 35,000 total verses. So that's one part in 1,000. And that means it's not a science book any more than Stephen Hawking's last book, has anything to do with me. I think he did try to answer like these big questions before he died. But yeah, I see it as unfortunately something that religious practitioners are going to have to accommodate the while they're taking in information and data, but realizing it comes without wisdom. And I think the job of religious believers is to supply the wisdom that humans really need to survive and to thrive.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yes, that is a very good point. And yeah, it's there's always a need for religious people to take in some more science. Always can help. I'm just wondering, in terms of the world going forward, do you see a radical shift in societal norms that will last more than the next few years?
That's a really good question. I was thinking about that today in the context of something that's called the second law of thermodynamics. And I know you're intimately familiar with those laws.
Not at all. It was not on the roster for rabbinic studies.
It's not. Yeshiva University doesn't cover that. So what the second law of thermodynamics says is completely familiar to anybody who's ever mixed, cream into their coffee. And it says that the disorder, what's called entropy, always increases. It can't decrease. And therefore, you'll never see the coffee-milk combination, cream combination, dissociate into half cream, half coffee. Why is that? Well, what it comes down to is that there's so many different ways, more ways that you could have coffee particles mixed with cream particles than there is only one state where you could have half coffee, half milk, right? Or cream. I keep saying milk, but cream, whatever, it doesn't matter. So there's only one configuration. So that means that nature can occupy many more, there's a lot more real estate in the chaos mixed up state. And that I take to heart. I think about, well, could things, you ever think 6 months ago, well, I wonder what life under a global pandemic would be like. No, you weren't thinking about that. I wasn't thinking about that. You always think about things in the future, but you don't think about this specific thing. And that's because there's so many different ways your life could be worse, right? Even right now, your life could be so much more worse. How much better could it be? If I gave you $1 million, then you'd have, you'd be a billionaire plus $1 million, as far as I understand. Rabbis make
definitely, yeah,
incredible salary. So yeah, you could double your salary and your life would be better. But it's not like you'd be going from like somebody living in Mumbai, on a couple of dollars per day, to $1 million. Okay, that makes a bigger difference. But just for you, Rabbi, so there's very few ways to make your life appreciably better immediely. Even like praying. I mean, it's important. It's part of your like working out. But it doesn't make your life a quantum jump. The way that your life could achieve a quantum destruction, God forbid, very easily. So I take that in mind. I hope people remember that there's so many different ways, even now at this awful crisis and many tragic, and thank God I have not, I've known some people that have had it, but thank God they've all recovered. And so, it's a challenge and we want to get through it. But I take this to mean like the key principle of happiness and for wisdom, I think, is to realize how good life is and how short and precious it is. So I hope a good thing that might come out of this or a repercussion is that we appreciate the grace and the goodness that we have in life.
All right. Well, that was very, very inspiring, very, very insightful and informative. One thing I wanted to share with you, there's nothing that brings greater joy from this interview to anyone than my grandmother watching it, which she will. And she's from the generation where, like you said, when you said the word scientist or physicist, it's like, the holy of holiest. And so I asked her if she had any question, and I promised that I would convey it. So I'm going to do it. She said, we don't know yet how this is going to impact in terms of contagion from humans to animals and vice versa. Do you think there's a situation where we'll have to separate humans and animals? For example, if in New York, where it's at its worst, if they discover that it's among animals and those animals can be controlled as well as the humans in terms of counting for sterility and counting for cleanliness, do you see this need to separate?
Bubby, I'm not sure I can answer that
Grandma
question.
Grandma.
I to think about the vectors, and that's the way that a disease propagates. In this case, it came, as you wrote about, from bats. which are, we talked about last week's parsha, right? So, what the Torah, or what, we can say about actual, interchange between species, there is something very special about that. Now, maybe it could have come through, a kosher chicken, or something like that. So we can't say. Now, the question as to how it gets into the bloodstream, I know that there was a case of a tiger, who got it. And yeah, we don't know exactly, if the tiger got it, from how it got it from a person, or maybe from a bird or a bat. We don't actually know. So for now, I haven't seen things where like house pets are going to be quarantined or anything like that. It's certainly something that could happen, and that would be pretty, devastating, I think, for people that have pets, and now they have to worry about that. I will refer your grandmother to go watch the Simpsons episode where this company is trying to gin up a panic, and they gin up a panic called, that's based on cats. And the cats give this virus that infects everybody on Earth, and they call it the perfect storm. So, maybe she shouldn't watch it. I don't know. I might give her more to be concerned about. But it's a very good question. We know so little about how this is transmitted, the so-called R naught, how infectious it is between person to person, let alone between person and animal. I think, the thing that will really help is having a vaccine. But these things do evolve. They evolve incredibly quickly, and they have different strains. That's why we can't really cure the influenza with a single shot. We need to change it each year, and sometimes only 50-50 chance of it work. So I hope that doesn't occur. But again, your grandmother's pointing out what I just said. There's so many more ways that life could get worse right now. Enjoy life the way it is right now, and appreciate everything that you have, because it could be so much easier to be worse, unfortunately.
Wow. All right. Well, thank you so much. And to anyone watching this, please check out Dr. Keating's book, Losing the Nobel Prize. He has a fantastic website, a podcast. So thank you so much. And it's an honor to have you on.
Thank you, Rabbi. I hope we can do it again.
Amen. Thank you. Thanks a lot.